Hey guys, Aaron here. Today we're going to be going over the installation process of installing a leveling kit on a 2015 and newer F-150. Now this particular truck we're working on today is a 2020 F-150 Ford XLT two-wheel drive. It's got the 17-inch rims, and from the ground to the top of the fender in the front is 36 inches. And when we go to measure the rear, it's 38 inches from the ground to the fender. So we do have a little bit of a lower end front than the rear. That is common on these trucks, especially the trucks with the max tow option. You're gonna have the upgraded leaf springs in the rear, and that rear end is just gonna sit up a lot higher than the front does. So with all that said, let's go ahead and go over the parts and tools we're gonna need to get the job done. All right, so we need an 18mm socket, a 27mm socket, an 8mm and a 10mm wrench, an 18mm wrench, a 19mm wrench, a 21mm wrench, and a 27mm open end wrench. We're also going to need a large pry bar as well to help us remove the shock from the vehicle. And as far as the leveling kit goes, I'm going to be using MotoFab. I've used them a lot. They work great. They have an 1.5 and a 2.5 inch level spacing kit, depending on how high you want to go. We're going to be using the 1.5 today just to achieve that perfect level look. Now the first thing to do is properly lift the front end of the vehicle using a properly rated jack and jack stand. Now we're going to remove the tire. All right, now that we have that down, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our sway bar via the sway bar link. We're going to take an 18mm socket and remove the nut on the bottom side. Next thing we're going to do is remove this 10mm bolt that holds this bracket to the frame. It holds the ABS signal wire and the brake line. When we disconnect the upper ball joint from the spindle, it'll kind of help everything move over to the side. All right, next thing, we just need to loosen up the upper control arm bolts. Take the nut and just loosen it up. It's gonna allow us to take our upper control arm and swing it up out of the way so we can remove our strut. All right, now that's done, let's go ahead and take our 18mm socket and we're gonna move all 3 nuts from the upper strut. Complete, we are going to loosen up the lower control arm bolts with a 27mm socket or wrench, just like we did with the upper control arm. We're just going to remove these so it'll allow the lower control arm to go down a few more inches. Now that that's done, let's go ahead and remove both nuts that hold the stud to the lower control arm using an 18mm socket. Now, one thing that might be helpful for some of you guys is to remove the tie rod from the spindle using a 21mm socket. You can go ahead and just zip that nut off, take a mallet and hit the side of the spindle really hard, and it'll free up the tie rod. On this two-wheel drive truck, I won't need to do that. I have plenty of room, especially with the help of a pry bar. The last step before we can take our shock out is to separate the upper ball joint from the spindle. We're going to be removing this nut here with an 18mm socket. Sometimes the ball joint will spin on you. If that's the case, take an 8mm or 5/16 wrench and just hold the ball joint in place. If your ball joint is stuck to your spindle, take a mallet, just hit the spindle here really hard, and they eventually will separate. Now, as you can see, we have our spindle separated from our upper ball joint. One thing we have to watch out for is not to put too much tension onto this ABS wire here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a large zip tie and I'm going to zip tie the spindle close to the back of the frame. All right, now that's complete, we can go ahead and remove our stock strut from the vehicle. Now that we got the strut on the workbench, let's go ahead and install our spacer. All right, so with our leveling spacer on, we're set to throw our stock strut back onto the vehicle. One thing to note when you're putting the strut back in is you're gonna have to put it in 180 degrees from how you took it out. The reason for that is the bolts on the spacer. We basically took the spacer's bolts and we flipped them. As you can see, our new mounting holes are opposite of what they once were. Let's go ahead and install the supplied hardware that holds our spacer to the coil bucket. All right, next we're gonna go ahead and throw our original nuts back onto our strut. Next, once we have that done, let's go ahead and tighten up the upper control arm bolts and the lower control arm bolts we previously loosened. All right, and that pretty much concludes the work that's needed on this side. This is the passenger side. I'm gonna go ahead and knock out the driver's side. The driver's side is the same exact procedure as the passenger side here. It is important to note though, you will need an alignment, as I stated earlier, after doing this. So make sure you schedule yourself an appointment at your local alignment shop. All right, so just wrapped up the driver's side, and as you can see, the vehicle is on the ground and it is substantially higher. It is about 1.5 inches difference. We're measuring about 38 1/4, which is in 1/4 inch of the rear of the vehicle. This kit's definitely going to give us the clearance that we want, and it's going to give us the option to go with a bigger tire in the future. I hope this video has helped you guys out. If it has, please like and subscribe, and make sure to check out the links in the description for the parts and tools I used during this video. Thanks again as always, guys. See you next time.